So, yes and no. This is a joke that gets thrown around on the internet sometimes that what's the time difference between archaeology and grave robbing? And the distinct difference is that it doesn't have anything to do with time. It has to do with recording and taking pictures, because you're not going to do that when you're grave robbing.
All right, well, chat. So, everyone, welcome in for our kickoff show. Tonight, we're kicking off our 2026 Women in STEM series with none other than the one, the only, the legendary, the incredible, the person I've met in person, Melissa in Denial, a real life Egyptologist, educational streamer extraordinaire. Ma'am, welcome on in. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so glad to be here. Absolutely.
Now, we're going to be going over some questions from the audience. We've got a bunch of questions that I have as well. Let's go back to the very beginning, Melissa. The very, very beginning. When did you start knowing that you wanted to be into Egyptology? Like, where did that come from?
I always say it came from two kind of main places. When I was a very little kid, I loved to read a lot, and my favorite book series when I was a kid was the Magic Treehouse series. And the second or third book is called Mummies in the Morning. And if you've never read the series, it's one of my favorites. It's two siblings, a brother and a sister, who go in their treehouse, and they go through time and space, and they learn about history and also dinosaurs and other really cool events. And Mary Pope Osborne, who wrote the book, she would also sometimes write a nonfiction companion book as well. And so my mom bought both of them for me. And so I had the really cool fiction story, which did include a mummy coming alive and scaring the kids. But then it also included the actual facts about ancient Egypt. And ever since then, I was truly hooked. One of the big kind of things that spurred me on into learning more about ancient Egypt is going to go see the Tutankhamun exhibition at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia when I was like 11 or something. I notably ditched my parents and my family because I knew everything that they were coming up and telling me. They were like, "Oh, did you know this? Did you know this?" I'm like, "No, no, I already knew that. I've read that before." And I was very convinced that the mask of Tutankhamun would be in the very last room of the exhibit because that's just the cool last thing to show. So I ditched everyone and I went to go to the last room and was extremely disappointed that unfortunately the mask does not leave Egypt pretty much ever. And so I it was always sort of like a vendetta that I'm like, okay, I have to go see it one day. I ended up writing that in my like grad school essays because it was just something that I was like, one day I will finally get to go and see this. Um, but I took a very windy path. I There was a large gap, sort of like I always liked Egypt, but there was a very large gap in high school into early college that I didn't know anything about archaeology or history, and I didn't have any sort of interest in going into it. Um, the joke is that I mainly went to school for creative writing because that was what I was really into in high school and writing novels. And archaeology is going to be my backup job, which, for anyone who knows anything about archaeology, it's not a backup job type of job because it pays nothing, sadly. Uh, but as soon as I started taking classes in archaeology and history, that flipped so quickly. Creative writing was the side thing. And I was like, wait, you can actually get jobs in this. And that was more, I was on just plain old archaeology, excavating. Probably would have gone into uh, cultural resource management or CRM, which is the vast majority of archaeologists who work in the United States do that. Um, and then I got back into Egypt by taking one class when I studied abroad at the University College London. They have a museum called the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Art and Archaeology, and our Egyptology class was in the museum, and I got to touch artifacts, and I was like, "Oh, now I'm in deep. Now I'm in deep. That's what I want to do."
So it's almost like that class led that to that rediscovery as a kid of being in that museum, right, and running through and trying to find King Tut's mask. Except now you get
Yeah.
to actually handle some of the artifacts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was something that I was so excited to be able to actually have access to that. And the thing that really kind of clinched with me is that I I'm an artifacts person. We would call that like a material culture person. Like I'm not a linguist. I have done archaeology, I have done excavation, but that is not what I actively do. I love artifacts and I want to use those and to teach people about ancient Egypt and about the history. And I love imagining the people who would have owned these objects. And so being able to like actually touch something, even if it's not like if it's just a random piece of pottery, like something that is so utilitarian, something that is not nearly as fancy as King Tut's mask, like somebody still touched this, somebody still made this. What can we tell us about that history of that person?
So, what are the, I guess, the different fields that you could have picked going into Egyptology? And with that, how did you make your decision on the artifact side of things? Like you said, you were also in the field, collecting, and then now
Mhm.
in the museums as well, like curating the pieces. Like, how did you find your favorite, and what are could have been other avenues that you could have gone down on?
There are so many other avenues, truly. And I think the unfortunate part is that like it just every so often it changed. Like one little thing that would happen in my life would suddenly change it. So for a while was I was just enthralled by any archaeology. And so I needed to get any sort of experience. And so I was mostly doing volunteer excavations on the East Coast of the United States, which is like not my time period, not what I'm learning about. I'm not learning about those artifacts of that time period. I am just, as we love to call them, a shovel bum. I am just a free labor to get an excavation done to then clean the artifacts and kind of get things on their way.
So is
Um,
that one of those positions where it's almost like an internship where you need to go through this experience in order to progress in the field? And so, because you said I'm digging on the east coast of the United States, and then you're an Egyptologist,
yeah,
right? So are the skills really that translatable? And then what were you digging on the east coast, just out of curiosity?
yeah.
As like was it as exciting, or and then again it'll be tidying back to what was it? I think the overall theme was about Egypt that really grasped you.
Yeah. So archaeology is relatively universal. You can get your very basic skills from what we would call a field school. You can go to a field school anywhere. Some are hyper specific on something like bioarchaeology. You're going to be excavating graves of humans and you're going to have to do something like that. There are other kind of specialties, but a very basic field school will give you all of the tasks and the things that you need to know whenever you go out in the field, with the exception that every single site is completely different and you have different paperwork and you have different excavation techniques and da da da, like literally listing off everything else. That everything is different. So I have never actually excavated in Egypt, and that is not technically a requirement for an Egyptologist. Egypt, unfortunately, is very hard for people to excavate in. You really need to be a PhD student. So I only have my master's, and I didn't. When I was in my master's, I was an art history major rather than a history major, and the professors that I worked with didn't have excavations or do work in Egypt. So you only can kind of get those opportunities typically when you're working with a professor. But
And it sounds like the
the
permitting too that you were learning about, and
yeah,
just all the requirements to go into a site. Like you were saying, it's different for every single site. I can't imagine
everything.
then that a professor could just say, I'm just going to sponsor you without an established history in Egypt, right? So that's going to be a very,
Yeah.
very niche set of
Egypt is
skill.
hard
Yeah.
because you need security clearances most of the time. That's like the big thing is that you need a security clearance to be able to excavate. Most other places you don't. Most other places, if you are with that field school or with that field team, you don't have to go through like security clearances, but you do have to do that in Egypt. Egypt has really really strict laws around it. But the stuff that I was excavating, all of the excavations I've done three or four in the Virginia, DC, Maryland area. I've done a excavation in the island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then I did a 2 week excavation in southern England when I was studying abroad, and then my field school I did outside of Rome. So the United States and the St. Croix one are very similar. We're looking at like after colonization, you're also looking at specific sites. So I worked on a what is that 17th century plantation site. I worked on a site that was the former home of one of the first freed African American men in Washington D.C. In Georgetown, who bought his own property. And then supposedly people said that he was like over 110 years old. And then when he died, his obituary went out in like every newspaper on the Eastern Seaboard saying that he was buried in his backyard. So the person who was doing this was a grad student who was doing this excavation and needed volunteers. And she was pretty much looking for him. We did not find him. But that was a very different site because typically in the United States, it again depends on the site, but you are probably only digging a couple feet. Like you probably only go into maybe 5 feet. That one on in particular, we went deeper because it was on a hill, so it had a much like bigger clearance. But when I was over in Rome, I was digging my height in a day, and I'm 5'11", and like we were digging so much because the section of the site that we were on had never been opened before, and we were looking for Roman occupation layers, which essentially is the layer that the Romans were actually working on and living on. The unfortunate thing is because the Romans are older, there's a ton of stuff above, all the Christian layers, all of the medieval layers. So what is unfortunately sad sometimes is that it also depends on what your scientific question is for the excavation. Because a group could come into that site and say, oh, can we go look at the Christian church that is in ruins right next to this giant Roman site? Yeah, sure. That's your research question. That is what you want to research. So you were going to look for these Christian or medieval occupation layers. Our group is over on the other side, and we're looking for the ancient city state of Gabi, which is what the site was called. So for the most part, we're kind of just trucking through these thick layers, not really caring, unfortunately, what is in there. We keep everything. You always have to record everything. You have to keep everything, but it's not as nitpicky as a layer in the United States where history is not technically as old for the most part.
So when you were digging down to these further, deeper layers, like you were saying, if you need to bypass a certain layer, there is no bypassing beyond just digging through it. You'll collect those specimens as you can and then just put them off, presumably into storage for anyone else who might be interested in the future. But like you said, if you won't get the same level of resolution of the data. Does it also matter? And this is probably a very naive question, but I would imagine what you dig into is very different at these different sites. Like the consistency of the dirt or stone. I know it's like it seems so fundamental, right? But like how does that change of your just your approach and what you use and like your depth, your height in a day versus like 5 feet? Like how do you
so
decide this, Melissa?
so for the most part, so it depends on obviously if you are working at a site that has documentation. So like if you think of most United States sites, they are going to have some sort of record of who owns that land. And for a lot of times, you can actually go back pretty far and say, oh, I actually know exactly who owned this land all the way back into the 1700s. So you collect all of that data before you even start digging. So you can figure out exactly the history of the site. So for example, one of the sites in Virginia that I've worked at is a plantation site. It had a plantation house at one point. We know that it had a laundry building and another building. They've been excavating the site for 30 years and we haven't found the mansion. Like this is a massive mansion and we still haven't found it. Granted, we're only excavating at this point up until 2020 we were excavating every weekend during the summer, and then after 2020 we've only been excavating once a week or one week a year. So it's a very slow going process.
A naive
We
question
do it
for you.
for our kids' archaeology camp.
I'm sure you
So
get
it's
I'm sure you get this question all the time. Why don't we just use radar?
we do.
So
Um,
like
we use ground penetrating radar
okay.
often. It's very expensive, and archaeologists don't have access to it a lot of the times.
So funding for this field is much like funding in everywhere else that we've talked about here on the stream of like it's just very low and you're
Yeah.
utilizing a really expensive tool. So do you think if I gave you just a big pile of money, if you use that type of radar, would you be able to more easily find this mansion, or is it one where the depths, the layer depths that you're going into, like you just need to be going classic digging at this point?
So, yes and no. The difficulty with this site is that we are butting up against a road and houses. Um, I suspect the house is underneath those houses. So essentially, what happens is, for the most part, we only need to do one radar. So they years ago did a GPR radar of this site, and so we have that, and we will reference that every single year that we go out and do it. But it does not. I'm not the biggest expert on GPR, but it does not show us exactly what we need. Unfortunately, it is all about soil texture and soil how compact it is. And it sometimes will show like metal objects, but like metal objects can be literally anything, like a spoon that somebody dropped in their picnic 2 months ago. Um, and so it is helpful, and we absolutely do use it. It's just often you use it once and then you come back and you reference it every single year. And it does definitely does work. I suspect, unfortunately, that we have the limitations of we're like literally butting up against the fence on this area, and then there's a street and then houses, and we're up on this very, very tall hill. So it could be anywhere there. This past season, we thought we found something because we found a huge layer of bricks. So we thought it might be chimney fall, like the chimney essentially had fallen at one point. And then we went underneath it, and there was nothing there. So, um, but the thing about soil, you're right. Soil is completely different. Virginia red clay is some of the worst dirt to excavate. It is bright red. It will stain any clothes you have, and you literally can't push it through a sieve. You just can't. It just like it's so thick and awful. But my site in Rome was relatively nice, and we mostly were using shovels and pickaxes or mattocks rather than the tiny trowels. Really, the tiny trowels are only when you're digging in kind of slower, more methodical. So when we were going through all those layers, we were mostly not using trowels.
Do you have a preference? I know it's, again, weird question. Do you have a soil preference that you like to dig in?
Oh, there's loam. Have you ever heard of loam? We
I
got
ha-
so. Oh, I wish I do. I have it. I might have it.
I would love if
One
you
of
had some
the
dirt
most
behind you.
expensive books that an archaeologist can ever own, and most archaeologists don't own it because it's so expensive. It's going to be hopefully making sure everyone can see us. This is a Munsell soil book, and I am only lucky to have it because my uncle works for the U.S. Geological Service and gave it to me for free. This is like an over 100 plus $200 book, and all it is paint chips. Um, so this allows you essentially to, for all of the colorblind people in the world and people who just don't see colors exactly the same, this allows you to uh, color exactly what color your soil is and with a certain code. So there's like for Virginia and for a lot of the East Coast, it's your 10YR page. And so this is like the standard colors of all the soils you would get. And then these books also contain information about different types of soil and like charcoal, the amount of charcoal that can be found in a unit. But no, anything but clay. Loam is nice. Sandy loam is a little weird, but sandy loam or loam is a pretty good one.
Almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss character, Sandy Loam. Yeah.
So,
So I we're gonna progress in your story, Melissa, of like how you came to be the incredible Egyptologist you are today. But I am just fascinated by some of these techniques. So, for example, like you're doing these like dig sites as requirements for your degree, right? You're going to all these different places. What do you do if like you were saying, you think that a particular site, the answer to your research question is under someone's house or a parking lot? Is that that?
Par- parking lot is potential. It has been done. Look up the excavation of the body of King Richard III, who was buried underneath the parking lot. That is successful. That was actually excavated for the most part. Although in the past this has been done by archaeologists and explorers alike. Um, Archaeology cannot disturb the current lives of people today. So there are unfortunate stories, especially in Egypt. There's a site in modern day Luxor, ancient Thebes, where on the West Bank is all the tombs, Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Nobles, and a section of the Valley of the Nobles, there was a modern village on top of it. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of their houses were either in the tombs or were flooding tombs with their plumbing. And the Egyptian government ousted the entire group so that you could get access to tombs. And it's just not appropriate. It's not ethical, unfortunately. So, one of the things, like, I would say, like, at least like 80% of the archaeology that is going on every single day for 24 hours all over the world that people don't know about. For the most part, these are not things that are going to make the news. These are not things that are going to be breathtaking, amazing finds. We have what we call cultural resource management, or CRM. These are entire companies or parts of companies that help do archaeology before development. And so if they tear down this house and they're going to put an apartment complex, they're going to put a grocery store. In particularly old parts of the United States, there are certain cities that have very strict archaeological laws that, just like you would go through planning and zoning when you're building a building for whatever city or county you're in, you will also have to go and hire an archaeologist to investigate it. That means doing the physical research, looking at all the different stuff. But then it also means determining, okay, do we have to excavate? How long is this going to take? How long is this going to disrupt construction? Because for a long time, archaeologists would come in and it would disturb construction because it would be unexpected. Now it is starting to get written into a lot of laws so that construction companies and development companies can expect it. So they can put that into the budget. They can put that into the timeline. Okay, archaeologists need a week to take over the site. But the thing about it is while we would love if you find a Roman road, like genuinely outside of Rome, there's a McDonald's that they were building and they found a Roman road underneath. So they put a glass floor in the McDonald's and then you were allowed to go outside and you can walk along the road underneath the McDonald's, which is really cool. We would love to be able to do that with everything. It is not possible, both financially and just not every site is interesting. Hate to say it. Not every site is interesting enough to have sort of an open air mini museum because that not only would disrupt the actual development and that would have to be put into the plans and do something like that. It would then also, somebody's got to go upkeep it. Somebody's got to go make sure people aren't running around in there. Like, it is exponentially just extra things. And so archaeology, while we are studying the past, we have to respect the future and we have to respect what is going to come on from this. But the best we can do is preserve, record, and share everything that we have found. And so I think people don't realize that archaeology is going on like 24/7, but you are never going to hear about these groups because a lot of times they actually are under NDAs or confidentialities because they're working with these development companies. And they only are working, they'll work in one location for 1 week and then they'll work in a next location for next week. They're very quick, efficient archaeological excavations.
You mentioned that some sites just aren't interesting. How does one decide? Because I mean that seems like an impossible decision, right? You're going to potentially wipe off very important part of human history. And what is the dividing line of this is interesting enough that we should keep this and stop construction and we need to make this like a whole museum monument versus put a Burger King on it?
In my opinion, it has to have actual ruins. There are plenty of archaeological sites that don't have a single ruin. That we have two different types of, when you're going through archaeological sites, you have artifacts and you have features. Artifacts are anything that is small enough that can fit in a bag or in a box or something. A feature is something that is too big to fix into that. So that can be a stone wall. It can be anything like that, a hearth. But then it also can be a soil discoloration that shows a fence, that there was all these post holes that made that fence. Not every site is going to have permanent ruins like that. There are plenty of sites that everything is just made out of wood. It's made out of organic materials. It just decomposes. So, to be honest, what is interesting is what the public would want to see. And for the most part, if I took a site that we saw really cool foundation things, we excavated down, we found this stuff, it just looks like a dirt hole. That is kind of what I would say is like what could be a good tourist attraction and a good thing to preserve, because the other option is, in some cases you can pick those ruins up and you can move them other places. That has been done many a time. There are many temples that were in Egypt that were going to be destroyed by the building of the Aswan High Dam and Lake Nasser. And many of those temples, some of the temples were preserved, some of them were not, but many of those temples were picked up, either placed back in Egypt or were gifted to other countries to as a thank you for helping with this giant UNESCO project. So
My
the big
favorite
one
of,
is the Temple of Dender in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
and there's the Temple of Abu Simbel, right? That was moved as well
Yep.
because it was going to flood. And I'm like, how does one move something like that and preserve it and make
They,
sure that you do it the right way? And
they made an artificial mountain and then they just picked it up and
it,
chopped it all up. You can see very closely when you look, you can see the lines where they've chopped up all the things, and then they just picked it up and just put it up there. But yeah, there's several of those temples that have been moved, and so the potential is there is that if you don't want to preserve it in situ, you can try to move it and put it somewhere else.
an important question I think for the community too is you mentioned ruins, and then you mentioned like impressions of like fence posts or foundations. What exactly, I guess, is a ruin? Just on the fundamental level for you, it's the non-organic, but is an imprint count as a ruin, or what exactly is that threshold?
I would consider a ruin something that is still, the fancy word in archaeology we use is in situ. So it is in the exact location that it was. And that, in my opinion, a ruin is anything that has larger structures that raise up again over the soil. So larger stones. There are evidence of like mud bricks. Mud brick does survive sometimes because it's obviously mud. If it gets fully buried, it sometimes will just like blend into the soil. But there are certain mud brick structures that can survive. But a ruin is just anything, any sort of structure that might even be complete. Like technically, like Karnak Temple is not fully complete, but it is almost complete in a lot of ways, and that is still a ruin, even though it's not fully complete.
For archaeology, is there a particular amount of time that has to have passed for you to be called in as an archaeologist? And is that how consistent is that from country to country, or is that there a universal definition that you can utilize for that?
So yes and no. This is a joke that gets thrown around on the internet sometimes. That what's the time difference between archaeology and grave robbing? And the distinct difference is that it doesn't have anything to do with time. It has to do with recording and taking pictures, because you're not going to do that when you're grave robbing. But really, archaeology will happen at any time because technically the layers on the very top portion of the soil are going to be contemporary to us. So you have to go through it no matter what, pretty much. And as one of my lovely coworkers has said, there's many archaeological sites that their collections are full of 20th century trash, and like quite literally trash. Like all of archaeology, all of artifacts are technically trash in some ways, but like we get plastic. We get so much plastic now, and these things they get collected because you got to collect it. Later, they could be deaccessioned, which is essentially the fancy word for either thrown out or donated somewhere else or getting them out of the collection. Deaccessioning has a lot of different ways to do it, although it is very difficult to do it.
I imagine it's gonna because that presumably exists because other things needed to have that undergone too, not just plastic, but something that maybe at one point, like a broken piece of pottery that doesn't have any art on it, that's just like, oh, we
Mm.
found it here. At a certain point, we run out of space, and you have to make the hard call of like, well, yes, this is a 3,000-year-old pot, but I see nothing on it. It's just a piece of it.
Exactly. We call that a diagnostic pieces get kept. So pieces with decoration, pieces that are diagnostic. So like the rim and the base and decoration and a maker's mark, like those things will get kept. Brick gets thrown out all the time, unless it has a stamp or like a animal handprint or a fingerprint or something. Um, on my field school, we had CBM, ceramic building material, aka roof tiles. we would document them. Most often what you do is you clean them to make sure that they don't have any marks. You weigh them and you record how much weight of them there are. And we actually, at the site in Italy, we reburied all the ceramic building material. Anything that didn't get kept just got reburied on the site, which is a new one for me. And usually I've seen like the site that the stuff that I look at now, if it's brick, it gets just thrown out after it gets weighed. But yeah, they reburied it on the site, which was nice.
Back to your journey and on the sites, which one of these sites that you worked on was one of your favorites? Like that this was kind of the calling card that you really wanted to, keep being involved in this for the rest of your life? And then
Mm-hmm.
what was the one where it was like, God, I don't know about this. I really don't like this. I'm questioning this.
My The first site I ever worked at, I started questioning everything about archaeology. And ironically, it's the only site that I still work at because it was when I was a volunteer at what my current full time job is. And it was mostly because again, have never done any archaeology at all. Like literally learning on the job. Um, isn't studying the time period of the site at all. And then the square or unit that the archaeologist gave me had a giant metal pole going through the middle from an old archaeological excavation from like probably the 70s. And I was like, I can't take it out. And he was like, no. And I'm like, I can't. And he goes, you got to get to the bottom of it. And I'm like, okay. And I called it the tetanus pole because it was completely rusted. And right over the line into the unit next to me that the other girl was working on, she found a bone pocket knife. And I was like, what? I was like, come on. And I was finding nothing. I was finding genuinely nothing, just actually crap. And I was so mad. And I remember thinking, I was like, God, is this really what I want to do? This is hard. Um, and then the only other one that I didn't like necessarily was more because I didn't actually get to dig it. um, when I went to St. Croix, I was working for a public archaeology firm that goes down to St. Croix and works with the Boys and Girls Club and does an archaeological camp for them. And so I was helping, kind of being her co-teacher, and we were helping with lessons with the Crucian children. And these were all high schoolers, which are not my cup of tea, because they all are so sassy to me and I don't know how to deal. And the I was supposed to be the person in the field that was teaching all the kids how to dig. That is what my boss told me that I was going to do. So I was very excited about doing it. There's a few pictures of me on the first day showing them like some basic things. And then somehow the entire rest of the dig, I got delegated to the lab, to the portable lab, and helping the kids clean artifacts. Which granted is usually one of my favorite things to do. I usually will absolutely clean artifacts till the day I die. Um, but I was a little bit I was just disappointed because I was like, I didn't go back. I didn't like swap. Like we were gonna swap and I didn't swap. So essentially I had to be stuck with all the teens and they're like, I'm done cleaning. And I'm like, no, you're not. And I take a giant bundle of all these artifacts and stick it into their sieve. And like was just a little bit of a hard week for me, but was a very very interesting site. And it was another plantation site, but we were specifically excavating the slave dwellings that were still intact at that site, which was really really interesting and fascinating. um, but my favorite site is definitely my field school site. Even though I never became a classicist, so I never studied ancient Rome. It was super super cool, and we learned so many different things within that because it's your field school. So we're learning about bioarchaeology, we're learning about zoo archaeology, we're learning about mapping and geographic information systems. And then it was just like a beautiful site in the Italian countryside. um, and I found probably like my favorite artifacts that I've ever found at any of my sites there, and it was a lot of fun. um, if I whenever somebody asks me what my favorite artifacts are, depending if it's a child, because my favorite one might be a little weird for a child, I usually say a die. So I found one half of a pair of dice that was Roman, and it was really really cool, and it was really good quality. And my professor smiled really big when he's like, "I think this is the nicest one we found." And so I was like, "This is amazing." And then if the people are adults and they ask me what my favorite artifact is, I found a human jawbone underneath a rock, um, on a Roman road, and that was definitely my most fascinating artifact. It only had a couple teeth in the back, and it was just absolutely fascinating. And it probably wasn't Roman; it was probably Christian, because there was a burial that probably had all like it was probably a cemetery that had all sort of over time washed down to where this was, but it was under a rock on the Roman road, which was just so fascinating. Um, and it's just the site was not my I didn't know anything about what was going on. They're all selling Roman emperors. I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I still had a lot of fun. Got to live in Rome for 5 weeks, go see Pompeii with with other archaeologists who like would have a great time going to these archaeological sites. So that was also really fun.
When you found the jawbone, did you have to go into almost forensics mode? Like, were you able to try to identify what he or she like? Could you figure out he or she? Could you do any DNA testing, what they died from, or like where is the extent of digging in the dirt versus then that lab work and the sample analysis come in, and how like what is the follow up to something like that?
So the basics of a field school typically it depends. So like our field school, we had a mobile lab, but that is just cleaning. That is just cleaning the artifacts and then packaging them. And then the evaluation is more done by the heads of the excavation and the PhD students who are working on the site. So that all happens much later. Um, in some in some places you ship the artifacts back. So like this was a University of Michigan excavation, and the University of Verona. Egypt, none of those artifacts are allowed to leave. So if you want to do like lab work, you have to go back to Egypt to do it. But that process is very long. It's very long. There's the potential that you can, like, let's say most excavation sites you're going to be excavating in the summer. Maybe you'll be able to go in back in the winter to go and do some of that lab work. But unfortunately, a lot of archaeologists, especially from universities or museums, they're working the other half of the year. Like they're excavating in the summer because that's when they have off to go excavate. So they have other duties to do it. But I did have a friend on the excavation who was training to be a bioarchaeologist. And so she was given a little bit of insights. We were trying to figure out a sex, but I don't think we were able to figure it out because it's just a jawbone. If you had a skull, we would have absolutely figured it out. Um, but that is one of the weird paths that I really considered taking. Um, and not just bioarchaeology, but forensic anthropology, which are separate things. When in my undergrad, I had very little actual archaeology classes because I essentially picked the wrong school. Again, remember, I was going for creative writing. I picked a very bad school in comparison for archaeology at the time, and then didn't leave it because I liked it too much. And we did have a professor come and teach forensic anthropology classes. And so the kind of difference, bioarchaeology is the study of like human bones, that like you can figure out cause of death. You can figure out kind of all of those things. Some people go into trying to figure out people's diets of that time, by like examining teeth. Um, the forensic anthropology is all of that, but it is made to solve a crime, because the only bodies that you're looking at are usually victims of a crime. And so that is sort of the modern angle of that lens, is that you're the modern people and then the ancient peoples. And so I took 2 forensic anthropology classes and I loved this teacher. She was amazing. And I was like, whoa, this is really cool. And I really liked working with human remains. And I liked that aspect of tell me your story. Tell me your history, tell me your story. Um, and then when I really got down to it, I was like, you know, I want to work with bodies that have been dead a really, really long time because I don't want to have to deal with the consequences of getting forensic stuff wrong. And like, I don't want to go to court. Like, I don't want to do any of that. And so for a while, I was really thinking of bioarchaeology. But I never pursued it because we didn't have any more classes about it. And I would have had to pretty much go to a different university if I really wanted to study it. But that is one of the fields that I was very close to, like, okay, wait, this would be really, really cool.
So once you completed your field studies and going to these different sites, everything from that delicious red clay of Virginia, right, to Rome, how did you know, or what did you use to identify that was a next step that you wanted to take, that you wanted to continue working in this field, for your master's degree as well? Like Was there an aha moment, or was there something that maybe you suggest to others in the chat who might be also interested in the field, that hey, you need to go through this before this defining moment is important before you decide on something like this?
God, I would have loved to have a defining moment. It was very happenstance, I will say. Essentially, I started doing all those excavations the summer before my junior year of college. Junior year of college comes around. I had already planned to go and study abroad in the spring. And essentially that year we get a new professor who is fresh out of his PhD. He's an archaeologist. He studies the African diaspora on Long Island. Like, he is fresh and green and ready to change the entire department. I love him. He's like my mentor, and I was like, wow. And he essentially was like, "What's wrong with the anthropology department?" And I'm like, "You want me to tell you?" And I told him everything. I told him everything that was horrible about it. And he kind of starts this change. And I felt really bad that I was like, "See ya, I'm going to London for 6 months." Um, and it was so essentially I come back, I do 5 months in London, I do 6 weeks in Rome. I come back in the middle of my summer before my senior year, and I meet with my professor at the beginning of the year, and he goes, "So you're going to go to grad school, right?" And I was like, "Uh, I guess." And I was like, "I guess that's what you do." This is literally what happened. Is like, "I guess that is what you do if you want to do archaeology." Um, the other funny thing, one of the problems with our department was that you had to do a senior thesis as an anthropology major, and they only offered the senior thesis my junior year, just for fun. And so they only offered it that spring that I left. And so I left knowing that I wasn't going to have the credits to do my senior thesis, but I agreed with my professor that we would do an independent study to get it done. And he was so keen and so ready. And he was like, "What do you want to do your project on?" I was like, "Well, I don't want to do an anthropological study, because in the comparison, a lot of anthropological studies are talking to real life, live people. And I always joke, I like to talk to the dead people." And so I was like, "I can do it about anything." And he goes, "Anything." And I'm like, "This is insane." So I picked Egypt. And so I picked my favorite time period, the Amarna period. I took lessons and papers that he had taught us in my African diaspora class, talking about quiet resistance and how enslaved individuals would sort of build up these small acts of resistance against their enslavers. And thought, oh, maybe I can apply this to the Amarna period, which is, for those who don't know, this tiny, tiny time period. It's like 15 years. Uh, right before the reign of Tutankhamun, because this is his dad, this pharaoh Akhenaten completely turns all ancient Egyptian culture on his head. He builds a whole new capital out of complete nothing. He takes one god and decides to make it the state god over any other god, all this polytheism. And a lot of ways that it is taught in schools, and I find in social media, that Akhenaten did not let anybody worship any other gods. Like he forbade it. Da da da. And I was like, I don't think we really have evidence of that. And then I ended up doing my paper looking through records of the archaeological site of Amarna, and finding hundreds of items and artifacts of the worship of other gods, not the Aten. And so mainly three household gods: Taweret, motherhood goddess; Hathor, another motherhood, childbirth goddess; and then Bes, a god of kind of fun, but also protection of the house. And so I found that these items were actively being made in Amarna, and I mapped them on the entire map of the city to show what hubs were they being more actively worshipped. And that is what I did my project on. And God love my professor. He knew nothing about ancient Egypt. He was just going along for the ride. It was genuinely hysterical, but also, looking back at what I learned in grad school, I would have written this paper completely differently. um, but he sort of just encouraged me that, like, grad school is the way. That is the way to do it. And I was like, okay, I guess that's the way. And I'll say that I jumped in completely head first and hit my head on the bottom of the pool. Like, it was not a good decision. And I luckily, what happened essentially, I ran out of time to take my GRE, which is the grad school sort of SAT. So I decided to take a gap year. So at the least, I took a gap year, and then I was like, I'll figure this out during the gap year. I still dove in way too deep. I applied to every single school in the United States that has an Egyptology PhD or master's program, spent over $700 on application fees, and got denied from every single one except two, one of which the PhD denied me but sent me to their master's program. And then they told me, oh, it's free for your second year, but you have to pay $60,000 for the first year, which at that point, I think was even more than my student loans for my undergrad for 1 year. And then the last school said, sure, you can come for free as long as you're an assistant. And I was like, I guess that's where I'm going. And it literally, this is how it happened. And it didn't click that this was not the best decision until about halfway through the 2 year program, and realizing I should have gone more general. I should have gone public archaeology. I should have gone public history. I should have done museum studies, because what I really discovered was I didn't want to be a professor, which is sort of the standard if you go and get a PhD eventually. Um, I didn't, I wanted a 9 to 5. I wanted to be able to go to work and then come home and then not do work. Because I had, for that, at that point, been in school for so long. And that is just like, I can't do it anymore. Um, and then I realized I liked teaching, but I don't want to create lesson plans. I don't want to grade papers. I don't want to do any of that, but I still wanted to teach. And that was when museum education really kind of came into my life. And it came into my life very happenstance. Because I got a graduate certificate in museum studies, I had to do 2 internships. And there were no internships really that I wanted around where my school was. So I went home. And what did I do? I got an intern at the place that I had done my first excavation. And it was the best experience of my life, and now I work there full time. And so it was also completely happenstance, because the other thing that I was doing, was like, I was helping with kids archaeology camp and events and stuff like that. But the best part was that one of the archaeologists said that he had a research project for me, literally about an ancient Egyptian mummy that went on display in the 1830s in that city. And I was like, what? Did you just plop the perfect project in my lap? It has become my, like, besides my thesis work of in grad school, has become like my baby. And I have done many lectures about it on Twitch and talking about it in a lot of different ways, because I love that mummy so much.
What does the work on that look like? Like, what is your day to day working in the museum, working on these projects? Like, for someone at home, right? There's kind of this image of an archaeologist that we get from movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
There's twists of that are not correct, right? So what does the day to day look like? What does a general day to day look like for the archaeologist, and what does the media get wrong? So if someone is
Mhm.
out there wanting to be an archaeologist, are you actually doing?
Yeah. So the CRM archaeologists that we've talked about earlier, the cultural resource management archaeologists, those are the ones that are going to be in the field like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, most of the time. But they are traveling very often hours away. One of our lovely friends on Twitch, uh, Runemeister Chris, is a CRM archaeologist, and he's been at a site for a month, living in a hotel. And so those are the kind of standard that you would think, oh, that those people are they're excavating all the time, they're doing paperwork. Eventually those artifacts will go back to a lab. You can also be a lab archaeologist, that all you're doing is working on the collection, cleaning it, cataloging it, labeling it, and then doing research on it. Um, in our museum, it's a little different, because for the most part, the archaeologists are not actively digging, because we are sort of that middle ground of, when a developer wants to create a new development, they have to go through us. So we do a little bit more research, but one of the archaeologists is the collections person, one of the archaeologists is the education person, one of the people, he loves maps. He can do anything with maps. He can figure out photos exactly where it is in our city very well. And then on my half, I'm the museum educator. And so museum educators, it differs based on how large the institution is. Many of them are part time, many of them are volunteer. Um, in larger institutions, a museum educator would be the person who's creating the lesson plans, scheduling lesson plans, like creating educational content for new exhibits, but they are often not the people who are actually working with kids or working with adults or doing tours. Those might be docents, those might be volunteers. That's like in the big, think like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That is like what that standard is. In smaller museums, you wear so many hats. So I run the front desk. I put in all the cash register. I sell merch. I sell tickets for certain a couple of our museums. And then I go either in our museums or I go to schools, and I teach our archaeology lessons, which are about archaeology at our site. But I literally on Friday helped the education archaeology coordinator to install 5 new exhibits. So that's what we did all day, cutting out foam, making sure artifacts were in stable condition so that they could put in. Um, but you can do we do everything. You can, and then ironically, I also, for my job, make short form content for our social media, which is hysterical in the differences of what I do on Melissa in Denial on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and then what I do for my real job, which we make 3 videos a month, and I make a video a day for Melissa in Denial.
For kind of looking back on the journey, do you have any particular advice for women in particular who'd want to get into the field, and kind of challenges and difficulties that you experienced, and how what you might tell those women watching and listening how to maybe navigate those, or had you known X, you would have navigated this differently? I don't know what kind of field it is, but I know the biological sciences is very competitive, and it's not competitive insofar as it's a fair level of competition, right? There's a huge level of gender disparity. How is it, I guess, in your field, and what challenges did you face, and what advice would you have for folks?
It is definitely becoming a woman owned field for sure. It is kind of funny how when I started off, I was surprised when people would tell me, "Oh no, archaeology is like a male centered field," and I'm like, "But everyone in my classes are women." Like literally, I until my second year of grad school, I only had female like cohorts. Um, but it is growing to be like very very much a women based field, or at least getting more equal in that way. Like I've seen so many amazing women who are doing amazing projects. Technically, the head archaeologist in our city, we've only had women. We've had 3 women be the head archaeologist for our city for 50 years. And so I think it is a good and up and coming field. The best advice I can give to people is that it's unfortunately a little bit of a sad advice, but you need passion to do this job. This is not a job for money. This is a job for passion. This is a job that you will walk away every single day learning something new, and feeling really invigorated by that. It's not going to make you any money. And so, depending on what you're specifically doing, like it can be a competitive field. To be a shovel bum, to work on a CRM, they are looking for people all the time. All the time, they are looking for people. Um, but it's a difficult job because you're obviously traveling a lot and living in hotels and going back and forth in a lot of ways. The museum curators, the conservators is a really great job. It takes a lot of more science than most archaeology jobs. Because obviously a conservator can conserve like a medieval painting, but they can also conserve archaeological items. But if you're really like chemistry, you'd be great at it. And that is a very high paying job because you can pretty much do anything. Like you can do any sort of conservation. You do not have to focus on anything in particular. Um, but yeah, it is the best advice I can give is that you have to kind of have that passion for it. And the other thing is, it is not shameful to just be a hobby historian or a hobby like Egyptologist. Um, You can be a hobby archaeologist. Just make sure you don't dig, because for the most part you will be breaking laws. Um, but you can be a hobby historian. You can be a person who studies a lot. There are so many amateur archaeologists and amateur kind of like historians who are studying and take a lot of, just like they come up with great things and they write papers and they do that, but they don't dig, that is for sure. And they you don't have to go into that. I've met so many people who are like, I wanted to be an archaeologist, but my parents told me not to, or I didn't think I would get paid enough, and da da da. And I'm like, I'm sorry that that happened to you. I'm sorry that you didn't have the support that I definitely did from my family and friends. Um, but you can still like it, and you can still study it, and you can still read papers and go on, like, a lot of archaeological sites have like public archaeology days, and they love volunteers a lot of the time. So like, not usually volunteers who dig, but some institutions do. But like, there are places that you can work and you can learn about this without doing the full degree and making it your full-time job.
How did so this you mentioned it at the end of doing the social media post. How did this journey lead to you streaming on Twitch, right? In particular on your passion of Egyptology. Like it's, you're going on field sites and you're working in the museum. How did you come across this media as a effective way to communicate the beauties of Egypt?
Yeah, so Melissa in Denial started 5 years ago in 2020, and it started out of a pandemic, because I graduated grad school in the pandemic, which had a lot of pluses and minuses because I didn't have to go into the museum and do any of my assistantship work. I didn't have to clean the gallery and do anything like that. I just had to sit in my apartment and write my thesis. So it worked out a lot of ways. But the problem, what happened was, is that I was also doing this graduate studies certificate, and I still needed two more classes after that 2 years. And the only time that those two classes were being offered was spring of 2021. So I had like 6 months where I had to leave Memphis. I could not afford my apartment. I lost my assistantship because I graduated. I went back home, and I couldn't really get a job because I knew that I was going to have to take these two online courses for like one semester. So I knew that I had like a couple months where I needed to just do something. And one of my very good friends from college had started streaming on Twitch. Um, Literally maybe a month before, maybe in August of 2020. And I saw how much she loved playing video games, and she gave me a lot of confidence to start streaming on Twitch. But Melissa in Denial itself started only 2 months before I started streaming on Twitch, mainly posting blog posts and Instagram posts that would send you to the blog. Um, and it stemmed off of essentially that in grad school I had made a blog called Melissa in Denial, which was about the imposter syndrome that I was getting from grad school, being an Egyptology student. And so I had only maybe posted maybe like three or four blogs. And when I decided to do this, I couldn't think of a better name. I was just like, Melissa in Denial's too good. I have to do it. I have to continue with it. So the WordPress got converted. All the old blogs went away, and I started blogging um, multiple times a week. I was just writing and researching constantly, and posting on Instagram. And I only delayed posting starting streaming on Twitch because I was teaching a course. I was teaching an online course, and I was like, I can't do these at the same time. And so September 28th, 2020 is when I started Melissa in Denial, and November 20 something, I think it's also 28th or something, is when we started streaming on Twitch for the first time, as part of that. And then only like a couple months later did I actually start making short form content and posting on TikTok. Like, TikTok is more recent to me than Twitch is. And we started with doing a discovery tour of Assassin's Creed Origins, because I was terrified of actually playing the game, because I had never played a game like that before. I suddenly decided to stream on Twitch because I had bought that game about a year and a half before because I had gotten it for $11 on a really big sale. And I had always wanted to play it. And I thought, hey, people probably want to watch an Egyptologist play it. So we might as well play it. And that's how everything on Twitch started.
So tell us a little bit about the stream itself. Like, what kind of content do you do that for people who don't know? How do you blend that history and the love of Egypt with things that maybe make it a little bit more accessible to people, like, video games? How do you find like doing presentations and like what does the Melissa in Denial look like?
Yeah. So Melissa Nile at the moment is I stream 3 times a week, usually Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, unless something comes up and gets switched. And then typically during the week we play video games, and we always have little discussions in the beginning where you can answer questions about ancient Egypt. The video games range, so they at the very beginning when I started streaming 5 years ago, we were only playing Egyptology games. I've been slowly running out. So we've been expanding it to other parts of history, other parts of archaeology, as well as like we've done a couple linguistic games, we've done a couple museum based games, and we do those during the week. Usually we have a Tuesday game and then a Thursday game. And then on the weekends, it always depends on the time of the year, but we usually do drifting down denial discussion streams where essentially I'll usually pick a topic or we'll vote on a topic, and it's very casual. It's we just pull up the Wikipedia of whatever the topic is and we just go through it. Usually these are topics that I already know a little bit about. If I don't know something about it, that then falls into our lecture series. So starting in March this month, we have our Beyond Denial lecture series. We are on season 4. And I do one lecture a month about an ancient Egypt topic, and then I get a guest on our stream as well. So I just announced this month, on this coming Saturday, I'm going to be talking about the harem conspiracy, which is the actual assassination of Pharaoh Ramses III and all of the court records that we have preserved after his death, which is super interesting. And then in 2 weeks on Saturday, we are going to have one of my lovely TikTok mutuals, Crazy Cemetery Lady, come on, and we are going to talk about both genealogy and funerary practice because she both is a genealogist, but then she also makes videos about cleaning gravestones while also talking about the history of the person that is buried there. So we're kind of do a little melding of our interests, and so I'm actually going to talk a little bit about ancient Egyptian genealogy and what we know about that, as well as obviously ancient Egyptian funerary practices. And then she's going to talk a little bit more about modern genealogy and such. And so we do that from March to roughly September. Sometimes we've gone to October, but March to September, 2 lectures a month. Um, and then we just fill in with all the discussion streams. And we're finally back with our community game night once a month as well.
And occasionally there is an IRL adventure to Egypt. Could you tell us
Yeah.
about that experience, Melissa, when you got to go to Egypt?
It was 2 years ago, and it was an absolute dream come true. Um, Everyone I think assumes that you've always been like that people have been to Egypt if you say you're an Egyptologist, which is unfortunately not a requirement. And actually, one of my other grad school friends just went to Egypt for the first time, like last week, and she has her PhD. So it's like you don't necessarily have to because it's just sometimes a hard country to get to. But yeah, me and my dad went for 2 weeks. We saw so many different sites, not even everything that we saw, but we spent 2 weeks in Cairo and Luxor. Um, just got to see we went into literally 11 out of 12 tombs in the Valley of the Kings, which usually you can only go into at least 6. But we had a special pass that allowed us to go into every single one almost. And it was an amazing trip. I tried to live stream from our hotel outside of the Sphinx. It was like barely working. But the fun, exciting news is that I am now hosting my own trip to Egypt in 2027. We have just announced it that I will be hosting a trip with Travel Egypt Now, Abdel and Gina. They are Abdel is a PhD Egyptologist, and Gina is his wife, who's been always fascinated with Egypt. And we are hosting our first trip in February 2027, so in about a year. and we're gonna see so many things. I'm so excited, and I'm so excited to get even more content. Um,
That always like I remember those streams, like how just excited you were about the prospect of being able to go. Just act like it's again that dream come true feel. Did you get to see the mask that you wanted to see when you were a little kid running through that museum, and how did that feel to almost bring it full circle?
it was genuinely amazing, and there's a thing with Tutankhamun that and even Akhenaten and his father and the Amarna period. Sometimes people describe it as like the gateway drug into Egyptology because it is obviously Tutankhamun is like the most popular pharaoh. It is going to be the one that everybody is going to know. If you don't know anything about ancient Egypt, you know Tutankhamun's name. And the Amarna period is itself so unique because the art style is completely different, and it's just like there's just so many different things to it. And so a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's the gateway drug into Egyptology." Usually, when you get in there, then you go and find something else that you get interested in. And so I like I don't want to be the hipster. I want to be like, oh, I want to say my favorite pharaoh is Amenhotep III, and one of them that's not as popular. But when I went to Egypt, what was so obvious is that the only times that I cried, and I am a very emotional person and usually cry very often. The only times that I cried when I was in Egypt is when I saw Tutankhamun objects, and I was like, "Dang it!" I was like, "Dang it!" But I cried 3 times in the museum, and once was they this was when I went was before they've gotten moved to the Grand Egyptian Museum. I did get to go see the Grand Egyptian Museum when I was there, but it was not fully open at the moment. So we saw them in their original configuration. It's a small room, and it only has his jewelry, his mask, and a couple of his coffins, the golden ones. You can't take any pictures in that area. Like that was the rule at that time. And I was like outside of it looking at another one of his statues, and I just started crying. And I was like, I'm crying thinking about that I'm going to go see it. And I was like, it's not good. It's not good for me, fam. But yeah, it was an amazing experience to see it in person. And also to show my dad, because it was one of those things that as a kid you just like info dump on your parents about whatever your little passion is, and to be able to take him with me was just like fantastic. And like we went completely without a tour guide or anything, because I was supposed to be the tour guide. And so for the most part, like I was able to answer like most of the questions that he would ask me. And then sometimes there would be super specific ones and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Like, this is not my time period. This is a pyramid. I don't like pyramids. So it's like, but it was just genuinely like one of the best experiences. Like all of my childhood dreams come true, and I cannot wait to go back.
I love that. That's it. I mean, that was the excuse to go back, right? I don't know those answers yet. I'll go back and look it up for you. Um, Melissa, that is, it's such a wonderful story to hear, like from the beginning stages when you got interested in Egyptology to where you are today. And it's just, thank you very much for sharing that story with us. I've got a few more quick questions for you, if you don't mind. Um,
Absolutely.
a big one is, looking back on your career now, if someone were interested in Egyptology or archaeology, museum work, what piece of advice would you give them?
Take your time to figure out what you like. Try everything. And this is like my least favorite phrase in the world. Like, no, get your dues. Like my mom always would say, is like, you just have to go through the unpaid internship. You just have to go through those things. It sucks. It really, really does. But I did a very, very nice internship at the Brooklyn Museum for a full year, which is pretty rare, in their Egyptology curatorial department. And I was very excited. I was like, yay, Egyptian artifacts. This is going to be great. All I did was scan 100-year-old slides of scarabs for days. So boring.
Oh, wait,
Um,
follow-up question though. Don't scarabs dig into your skin and eat your brain? I mean, that's what the cinematic masterpiece The Mummy taught me.
eh, nope.
Are the scarabs like
Absolutely not.
they're
They are
preserved exoskeletons? Like that's you're scanning the insects and it's not even, or is it like,
No, we're not scanning the insects. We're scanning the stone scarabs.
gotcha.
Yeah. Whenever you say scarabs, we're not talking about actual scarabs. We're talking about. I have like some really crappy fake scarabs. Like they're just like little stones,
Are
little
those
carved stones that look like scarabs.
and those are hand carved?
Hmm.
What,
Yep.
again, back to naive questions. What's the significance of the wonderful hand carved scarabs? Is it presumably is it something religious related?
So in some ways they are like a seal, like a ring with a seal. So for the most part, they will have some sort of hieroglyphs on the back. And they typically will have the hieroglyphs of a pharaoh, and they sort of can be used as sort of an identifying item, like a coin, because ancient Egyptians didn't have coins until the Persians invaded at the very end of their reign. But the scarab itself is a really big symbol in mythology about regeneration and rebirth. Um, the scarab god is known as Khepri. Not every scarab is meant to be Khepri, but a lot of scarabs are supposed to be Khepri. And essentially, he's a god of this like rebirth, this regeneration. He's a sun god. And what it mainly is that a dung beetle, so like a physical dung beetle, rolls this ball of dung just like a scarab would roll the sun across the sky. Um, in addition, they also looked at the scarab, and I was gonna say I'm teaching you about bugs, which is very funny for me. Um, but the the dung beetle lays its eggs inside the dung piece, and then the eggs hatch and they come out. We assume that the ancient Egyptians looked at this and saw that these animals came from nothing, that they regenerated from nothing. They just appeared because they didn't understand the concept of eggs in this case. And so that is one of the kind of assumptions that we think that like that is why the scarab was so sacred, is because it could come from nothing and regenerate and rebirth itself. So like the physical tiny scarabs for the most part have like little hieroglyphs stuff. Most of it often it's a cartouche of the pharaoh's name. I mean, these are fake ones, so it doesn't matter what these say. But the other thing, they are beads, they're decoration. They can be used in a lot of different stuff. Um, and they also are very often depicted in like large, broad collars. They have the scarab in the front with the big sun disk and its wings coming out, like the winged scarab. So they're very much associated with the pharaoh as an element of the god Horus, because each pharaoh is sort of meant to become, it's meant to be Horus. He's meant to be that god. He's a regeneration of the actual ancient Egyptian god himself, a living one.
Cool. So that's the even though it was methodical as you're scanning the same bug over and over and over again, there's a lot of really, really interesting history behind it. So, like you said, it's
Yeah.
almost, yes, you're paying your dues, but it's also, you have to have, back to what you were saying about that passion, that you have to be excited
Yes.
about this, right? And seeing the cartouches on the back,
Yes.
presumably, and the artwork and the structures kind of kept it
But
going.
the other thing is that the you have to try things to figure out what individual field you would like. So in that sense, I was suddenly like, I don't know if I want to be a collections manager. I don't know if I want to be a curator, because the like, I do love designing exhibits. I like doing that. I'm not the biggest exhibit writer. Like that is something that I struggle with because people only read the first like 5 words. Like it's noted, like we have so many studies of like, oh yeah, they only um they only actually read for about 5 seconds and then they move on. And I am one of those people. I do not like to read exhibit text. I like the objects. I like to look at the objects themselves. And so I was like, okay, I don't know if I really want to design exhibits or do anything like that. I would love to pick what objects are going in the exhibit, but it's testing out different projects and testing out like different aspects of this field, because there's a lot of places that you can get applied to. There are full exhibit design companies that like if you like history or you like museums, you could be really good at that if you're really good at like graphic design and just like design like that, but you don't necessarily have to be an archaeologist or have that background. And so like there are lots of fields within the museum field and archaeology and history that you can spread out to lots and lots of different sides of it.
Then my final big heavy hitting question for you, Melissa, before we ask you to plug all of the things, let people know where to find you, all the things, of course. So in the media, right, especially with archaeology, Egyptology, whatnot, there is a sensationalization of like grave robbing, but also of being a dude. And it's always like it was really cool that you were telling us that there's this takeover of the field now with women and kind of
Mhm.
making it your own. That's not necessarily that's what's seen in the public eye, right? However, you are a symbol, right? You're a leader in the field, and you're also an incredible woman in STEM. So what does it mean to you to be an incredible woman in STEM and to be a role model for the next generation?
It means so much because, to be honest, I'm literally wearing my Indiana Jones shirt right now. Indiana Jones was a big inspiration for so many archaeologists. It was still a big inspiration for me as an archaeologist, even though it is a man. Um, but thinking that I could be that person for someone is kind of mind blowing. Like there are actual studies that show that there is a steep increase of people going into the field of archaeology because of Indiana Jones. Um, with the understanding that yeah, Indiana Jones is not archaeology. There's lots of tiny little aspects of it. The only actual archaeology that happens in any of the Indiana Jones movies is by the villain in the first one. He's actually doing a pretty good excavation at Tanis, and I'm like, dang it, that sucks. Um, but it would be mind blowing if people saw me as an influence in that, and that people wanted to go into Egyptology because of me, just because I like talking about dang random things that I find, and I just would it would be amazing. It would be amazing, and it would be archaeology and Egyptology are not are they're not getting represented in fictional media very often anymore. Like truly. If you really, really look at it, there's a steep decline of it. And so if that is stemming to now that they would rather the content that people are watching is more people who are experts in the field talking about it, and in a very chill format, not a fancy documentary, in just a we're wandering around and I just get to talk about whatever I want to talk about. Like that is just absolutely inspiring and just makes me really happy to continue doing what I do, because I I'm sad that I didn't get to do I as my name suggests, I still have a lot of imposter syndrome from grad school, and it is very hard for me to put the Egyptologist label on myself because I don't have a PhD. Um, and thinking that people can actually get to still learn about stuff. Like Melissa in Denial is my passion project that allows me to keep talking about what I learned in school. Because if I didn't do this, I would not be focusing on Egypt at all. And my knowledge and my knowledge of hieroglyphs and everything that I learned there, I feel like would just have gone to waste. And so I'm very proud that I'm able to take what I've learned and shared it with other people.
And thank you for sharing with us today, Melissa, especially in the chats, of course, has a bajillion more questions. I would love to hear so much more about your work. Of course, we want to be respectful of your time, but for folks to satiate that itch of learning more from Melissa in Denial, from your lectures, your knowledge, and your time, where all can we find you? We've posted links into the chat and the show notes, but please plug everything and anything.
It's Melissa in Denial everywhere, and DENINILE is everywhere. I am mainly posting. So I post pretty much every single day on TikTok. I have a couple different series that I'm working on, but then those get reposted onto Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So if you don't have TikTok, don't worry, the videos will come out. They just may take a couple days to get out. I do also have a Patreon that it doesn't have a lot of stuff on it, but I do a newsletter. You just have to be a free member to get the newsletter on the Patreon. And then I do have an exclusive podcast. It's only $1 a month to listen to two different podcasts that I've been doing for a couple months now. One about an ancient Egyptian person, and one about a modern Egyptologist called Voices on Denial. And then again, I stream 3 times a week on Twitch. It's usually Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Sometimes things change. Usually 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, the lectures are all going to get announced. They've been announced on my Discord, but I'm posting them on my other platforms. I do like have a X and a Threads and all of that. I don't post on there. So mainly check out like my Instagram, my Facebook, or my YouTube. All of my past lectures, as well as all of my past guest lectures. You can check out the 5-hour lecture with paleontologizing that we did a couple years ago. Those are all on my YouTube. They are not cut down. They are the full stream. I don't like video editing. And then I've been slowly but surely also posting my discussion streams. So we did a whole series talking about the Royal Cache Tomb DB320. All of those are now on my YouTube. I just posted them all there. So I'm getting better at editing those down to go look at those discussion streams. And there will be much more to come.
Awesome. Melissa, thank you so very much for your time today, for sharing your expertise. It was far too short. We may have to chat again. I think you and I have been talking about a collaboration. I really like the idea of the scarabs and the dung beetles, because there's a lot of really cool neuroscience on them. Be
I
kind
would
of fun
love
to
to.
compare the history.
I would love to have you on our series because I literally just discovered the ancient Egyptian word for centipede the other day. And I was like, that's wild. Why do we have a word for that? Because I feel like I've never seen an image of a centipede.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought there being centipedes in Asia. All right, well, there we go. That's going to be an interesting rabbit hole to dig on into. Again, Melissa, thank you so much for your time, everything. We'll see you again real soon, folks. Make sure to go follow Melissa Denial on all the socials, in denial in more ways than one. And now we know it's because there was a WordPress for it, too. I did not know that origin story to it.
It's very in deep in my imposter syndrome that I still have, but it was even worse back then.
Melissa, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I will stay around and chat if you would like, and I can answer some questions, but I'll just be in chat because I'm going to go to bed.
Well, there's a bajillion fulfilling questions that we did not get to. So, folks, make sure you let Melissa sleep, and maybe go to her show and ask her the questions as well, because I know she's very passionate about answering them. She even answers my questions about Imhotep and Assassin's Creed Origins with an eye roll, but, she still answers them. Thank you again, Melissa.
Bye, guys.
Everyone, all backgrounds, all ages, all genders, and all walks of life deserve an education. Come be one of us.